I was reading about a young man who, somewhat unenthusiastically, was preparing for the Foreign Service for the United States at Georgetown University. About his plan at the time, he called it a decent plan for some sort of career in international affairs. Like, it made sense at the time, friends were supporting him, but his heart was not in it. Well, everything was about to change, and it was because of the power of a single book. The book that changed this man's life was Thomas Merton's 7-Story Mountain, which is the story of a young Columbia University intellectual who became a Christian and then a monk. And I quote from the young man, "Never had words been so intimate to my own latent feelings, and never before had their honesty and authenticity moved me so deeply." Merton's journey charted a path into my own heart, stirring questions I did not ignore. Indeed, as I finished the book, I felt an aliveness I had never known. I mean, this is a great gift when someone brings out thoughts and feelings in you that you did not even know you had. This was the effect of Thomas Merton on this young man. He goes on to say that the effect of reading Merton's 7-Story Mountain was that there was the awakening of what he calls a primal desire that would henceforth be a factor in every decision I would ever make, in every moment of self-discovery I would ever experience. I mean, that is quite a testimony. The awakening of a primal desire that would affect him in every aspect of his life and for many, many years. I'm talking about our brother Christopher, who has now himself been a monk for more than 30 years. All kinds of people have responded with their hearts, with their minds to Thomas Merton and to the 7-Story Mountain. And I'm a member of that club. When I arrived for seminary studies in Kentucky in 1975, my first purchase was New Seeds of Contemplation by Thomas Merton. And when my fiancée joined me a semester later in Kentucky, our first big date was a visit to the Abbey of Gethsemane in Bardstown, Kentucky, where Merton had lived out his vocation until his death in 1968. There are two events that stand out at that monastery, and these events are vivid. One of them was discovering the Thomas Merton room at the monastery and listening on a cassette tape to an animated Tom Merton lecturing his students. It was really inspiring. Like, there's nothing dull or sour about the spirit of Thomas Merton. He was a captivating live wire. The second great event at the monastery was, well, I'd never been to a Catholic Mass before. I went to a Catholic Mass and heard Gregorian chant for the first time. I remember immediately thinking, I have been looking for this kind of music all my life, and I still love Gregorian chant. Merton's been an inspiring point of reference many times throughout my life's journey. There was a biography I read once by Monica Furlow, which ranks among my favorite books. And then there was the book called Thomas Merton's Dark Path by William Shannon, which introduced me to the apophatic way of knowing. About that another time. Not long ago, I read the Asian Journal of Thomas Merton. His dream had been to travel to the Orient, and before boarding the plane, this is so characteristic of Merton, he was required to pay extra for the overload of books he carried. Ever the keen student, among the books was a copy of Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha. I mean, all book lovers can identify with that, and we're grateful for like the Nook Touch and the Kindle. It was while in Asia that Merton had his most profound religious experience. In Ceylon, he came upon several Buddhist statues, and he says, quoting from the journal, "Looking at these figures, I was suddenly, almost forcibly, jerked clean out of the habitual, half-tide vision of things, and an inner clearness, clarity, as if exploding from the rocks themselves, became evident and obvious. I don't know," says Thomas Merton, "when in my life I have ever had such a sense of beauty and spiritual vitality running together in one aesthetic illumination. Now, about this Christian who experienced illumination in a Buddhist context, Amaya Chakravarti says, Merton saw the fullness of man's inheritance. That's what he sought. This inclusive view made it impossible for him to deny any authentic scripture or any man of faith. So Merton had what I would call like an open, searching spirit. There is another spirit alive in the world. There always has been. Perhaps there always will be. Anyway, they're very different spirits. Let's explore this a little bit. There's one spirit represented by Thomas Merton, an open heart, a searching spirit. There is another kind. Speaking of which, I once read The Ladder of Divine Ascent by St. John Climacus. He lived from approximately 579 to 649 AD. I initially valued what I was reading. Like, he had great things to say about a disciplined heart. He talked about having an unpublicized understanding. He wrote about unseen meditation, so there's this humility that he's advocating. There is talking about longing for the divine, living with an outpouring of love, living in a depth of silence, like all kinds of great things in the first part of the book. And then I came to what's called step number 5 of this ladder of ascent, to the section called On Penitence. And here I was sort of stopped cold. Here was another spirit. Here was something else. Because he talks about spending a month at what was called the monastery prison. The monastery prison. And he appears to have approved of and to have taken some kind of satisfaction in the self-tortures that penitents endured and practiced there as a kind of like a very severe asceticism. So, and he presents these men as, like, I thought he might be alarmed, but you don't have to read long before you find out that he regards these penitents as holy men. These holy men, he says, tortured themselves so severely that their knees were like wood, the result of all the prostrations. Their eyes were dim and sunken, their hair was gone, their cheeks were wasted, scalded by many tears, their faces were pale and worn. They were no different from corpses. You know, like they were having like fun till the daddy takes the T-bird away. Like, not exactly. Their breasts were livid. You know, I had to look that up. Their breasts were livid, black and blue. That's what it means. From all the beatings, which had even made them spit blood. I mean, is this holiness in action? There was no rest for them in their beds, no clean and laundered clothing. They were bedraggled, dirty, and verminous. Again, was this holiness? Climacus seems to have thought so. And then I discovered, because I'm always Googling, Google and you will know, find out this or that, a present-day fan of Climacus has said about this part of the book that if there's any part of the book which really shakes us and brings the message home, it is precisely this chapter concerning the blessed inmates of the prison. Blessed, oh. For truly, he says, these are the holy ones, crazed for Christ. The holy ones crazed for Christ. For Christ, oh, I can't even say it because it doesn't fit. I have another question. Is this the meaning of being crazed for Christ? I mean, this kind of lunacy. Well, it happens, I discovered also as I was Googling around, that Thomas Merton had read Climacus. And what was his response? Well, true to his spirit, true to his way of being in the world, he cringed just as I did. I guess I was thinking of it, he was kind of like out of touch with his inner Climacus, for which I'm grateful. Merton regarded the ladder of ascent as seldom, if ever, tender. It is, he calls it, a tough, hard-hitting, merciless book. Concerning the goings-on at the monastery prison, yeah, he read that chapter too. Merton says it reads today like a report of a badly run mental institution. Now it happens that the fellow who I just mentioned, who admired Climacus, also read Thomas Merton's review or his assessment of the monastery prison and decided to go after Thomas Merton in the spirit of the monastery prison. So in kind of a contemporary replication of that spirit of the monastery prison, the devotee of Climacus unsparingly attacks Tom Merton. Merton, he says, traveled to the Far East, there to seek from the worshippers of demons new insights and techniques for finding God. So who are the worshippers of demons? Well, like the Buddhists, or perhaps any of them who don't think the way you do, I guess is what he perhaps means. And it is there, he says, that this hapless man, instead of finding God, found only his tragic death. Well, these sound to me to be very unsympathetic words on his part, scathing words, and appear to indicate, sounds like it anyway, does he really mean this? It sounds like he sort of figures that Merton got what he deserved by opening his heart to the Orient. And maybe you've heard, maybe you haven't, the way Thomas Merton died. He was electrocuted by a faulty fan when he stepped into a bathtub. When I heard this, I wept. And tell me, is there another, more appropriate response than that upon hearing of such a death? Well, I'm talking about how, on the one hand, there's this open, searching spirit of a Thomas Merton, like a burning desire to know and to understand. And then there's something very different. I'm very grateful to a professor, a poet, his name is Scott Cairns, who has written about what he calls two distinct expressions of piety, or two spiritualities alive in the land, alive centuries ago and still today. On the one hand, there is what he calls a flavor of piety that continues to smile. He admires this. A flavor of piety that continues to smile during spiritual practices. And then there is this contrary spirit that appears to be about severity and suffering. He calls the first spirit that of resurrection, the second spirit a spirituality of crucifixion. The spirit of resurrection is, according to the poet Scott Cairns, running towards something. So this is joyfully anticipating. And then there is that spirituality of crucifixion, which is running away from something. That is it's negative, it's censorious, it's reactionary, it's legalistic, it's on the watch, ever ready to be disapproving. One spirit has to do with the sense of joy that's already been attained in the kingdom of God. The other, Scott Cairns calls a species of hell. Well, I've stood for many years now with Thomas Merton. He's been my longtime friend through his writings. I can't get enough of him. His spirit was a burning desire to know truth, beauty, and goodness wherever he could find it. And this spirit is on display in this last thing I want to share with you. Just listen to these wonderful words from Thomas Merton. At the center of our being is a point of nothingness, which is untouched by sin and by illusion, a point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God, which is ever at our disposal and inaccessible to the fantasies of our mind or the brutalities of our will. This little point of nothingness and of absolute purity, of absolute poverty, is the pure glory of God in us. It is like a pure diamond, blazing with the invisible light of heaven. It is in everybody, and if we could see it, we would see these billion points of light coming together in the face and blaze of a sun that would make all the darkness and cruelty of life vanish completely. This is vintage Thomas Merton. I love Thomas Merton. It is Merton and me, together now for many years, and all being well, perhaps for many more.